How you doing? Good, great. I'm so excited to be able to share with you today. Before we dive into our content, I've got two things up at the top. I'm a preface king. I'm the guy who is always trying to put things into context, and my wife always says, just stop. Just stop. You don't have to apologize for everything. But I feel like I should at least preface something. So I've got a housekeeping item, and then I have a preface for the content that we're going to be covering today. First, housekeeping item. I think that it's a very exciting thing that we have a staff here now that we've been searching for the better part of a year. And I just wanted to pull back the curtain so you could hear it from me on just what a little bit of this process has looked like. Because I've heard from enough people directly and a lot of people indirectly that it's like, oh, Joel's being forced out. And so let me pull back the curtain here just for a minute, because I think it would be valuable. 8 months ago, Jake and I sat down and we had an honest conversation about staffing here. Jake had already been talking about a kids person. We needed somebody in that room. We had amazing volunteers who were back there, but we needed somebody who was going to add fire to that. So that was a super important thing. And then we also needed somebody who was going to be able to handle youth things. I can take late night phone calls from some youth. I hang out with them on Wednesday nights. My original arrangement was plan Sunday morning, show up and rock it, and hang out with kids on Wednesday nights. There's a lot of pastoral stuff that happens beyond that that is, I just didn't have time for because I'm farming full time with my family. And so Jake and I were thinking the same thing, but I said it first. I think we need to find somebody who can have a combo role and handle worship and youth. Because we also needed somebody who would be developing the worship ministry here. And though I really love showing up and doing the music thing, I haven't done a lot of development here. We just show up at 8, rehearse, do the thing, and there's a lot of pastoral care that I think we could do, team development, bringing new people in, okay? So I want you to hear that from me. I am stepping away from this role with 2 fingers held high in the air, and it's these ones. All right? Do it again. We like that joke. Do it again. So I'm still going to be around. I'm going to be helping with special projects. Jake and I have already talked about that a little bit. We're not planning on moving. New Life has always felt like home to us. We left some pretty established careers in Minneapolis 3 years ago to come back home. And so we're not planning on going anywhere. There were some conversations in there. There were some offers made for us to leave. We declined those, and we're sticking around. All right? Yeah, thanks. The content that I'm covering this morning, here's the preface. I lost a little bit of sleep last night, mostly because we've been working nights on the farm. But if I hadn't been, then I might have lost a little bit of sleep over this, because we're going to be covering a topic that I haven't heard people really talk about in church at all, especially in a modern evangelical paradigm. I could get into the reasons why. I'm not going to. But in following in the steps of Jesus and speaking truth, we know as we read the Bible that the truth will set you free. But first, it might make you a little angry. And so in case you are a pitchfork-carrying sort of a person, I just want to make sure you have time to sharpen it before we dive in. All right? So we're in a series called Making Gainz, and when I read the series title for the first time, I couldn't help but think about elite athletes, those monsters of athletics who have developed themselves not only physically but mentally and emotionally, so that after those thousands upon thousands of hours of training, when called upon to do what they need to do, they just do it, and they're laser focused on doing what they do. A person that comes to mind for me instantly is a guy named Cameron Hanes. Now, Cameron Hanes is a lot of things. He's a pro bow hunter, I think is the thing that he's mostly known for. Well, Cameron, a couple years ago, woke up and said, hey, I really want to become a better hunter. I want to do it in a more humane way. And I want to get rid of the stigma that elk and deer hunters are overweight guys drinking beer with high-powered rifles, shooting anything that moves. I would really like to address that. So he started training. He said, physically, I really need to get into a good spot. So he started running, he started weight training, and then he practiced reps on his bow, practiced shooting. Fast forward now to today, Cameron Hanes wakes up in the morning, runs 13 to 14 miles. Pretty good, pretty good. He then goes to his job as a utility supervisor in Springfield, Oregon. He gets off work, goes and runs another 13 to 14 miles, okay? And then lifts weights like 3 times a day. Now, I am going to risk a lot and do simple arithmetic in public. Let's round 13 miles in the morning, 13 miles in the afternoon, carry the 4, that's 26. And regular humans, mere mortals like you and I, call a 26-mile run in a day a marathon. That's, amen, brother. That's what we call it. Cameron Hanes runs a marathon a day, and that's no exaggeration. And so he runs these ultra marathons where he's running 100, even 150 miles a day in 24 hours, and he's a beast. He goes, he shoots his elk, quarters it out, packs it out of these remote places in the mountains, and then does it so efficiently that he goes back and helps other guys in his party pack their elk out too. Okay? And as for his shooting, this guy has been known to hit a balloon at 250 yards with a bow and arrow. Okay? Pretty amazing. Most guys draw on an elk at about, 40, 45, 50 yards most of the time. Okay, so if you're able to target practice at 80, you should draw on an elk at 40. This guy draws at like 75 to 80. So he can sneak up and do that, and he can hit from 80 yards consistently a 6-inch circle. Okay, so it's a more humane kill, right? Mission accomplished. I know that some people get squeamish around talking about hunting. I totally get that. I killed my first 2 deer ever last year. And my first one was my buck. I was pumped about that. I really didn't think about it too much. I just adrenaline pumping. Fast forward to a couple days later, season is ending. I've got my doe. I'm walking through corn stalks with her on my back, ugly crying. I just stopped a heart. Oh my God. Okay, so I get it. That's a lot. I was also a vegetarian for 3 years. No lie. It was the most depressing 3 years of my life. Is a life really worth living without bacon? No, amen, yes. We're going to rebrand ourselves, okay? I'm going to go start a bacon church. Cameron Hanes is a beast. There are things that we can do. There are things that we can practice to get ourselves to a physical spot. There are things that we can do to get ourselves to an emotional place even. There are a lot of things that we can do professionally to develop ourselves there. When it comes to spirituality, in my opinion, there is one spiritual discipline that ranks high above all the rest that can make you an ultra marathoner of spirituality and have major emotional and spiritual effects on you, and that is silence. But man, we don't ever talk about it. Now, I don't mean silence just not talking, because that's what you're doing right now, and this might be sheer torture for you. But there is a mode of silence that we could get into if we could silence all the noise in our lives. I wonder if we'd be able to hear God's voice better. I wonder if we'd be able to cut through the things that we deal with on an emotional level, on a daily basis. So I want to talk about that today. So we're going to get to the external stuff. There's plenty of noise. We live in a super noisy world. First, let's talk about the internal stuff. All right? We're going to take a deep dive. If you are a farmer in this room, and it's likely that you could be, you live a relatively noise-free life, just, in spite of equipment and hammering on stuff and whatever, right? Like, I get that. But if you're like me, and I know I am, if you're riding in a tractor or your truck, chances are you might find yourself talking to yourself. I do it. Or you've got this inner thing going on all the time, because what else can you do when you're alone operating a piece of machinery or by yourself than think? And oftentimes, and everybody has this, we have this constant rattle of thoughts going on all of the time. And most of us don't even realize that it's happening, and it affects our emotions, it affects our mood, and oftentimes it makes us kind of like these flaky emotional people, where I could wake up feeling great, and then I see that boss who fired me 21 years ago, and the day is horrible, right? And that's his fault, not the fault of whatever's going on in here. Okay? Have you ever found yourself driving down the road, minding your own business, and then reliving a point of conflict that you had with a person years ago? You just imagine yourself telling them off? We're so eloquent when we're out of that environment, aren't we? And you know what I told them? My mom did that all the time when we were kids. And I saw her and I told her, and we're like, Mom, you didn't say that. Everybody knows you're like the nicest person in the world. You didn't say that. But we fantasize about how we're going to tell that person off next time we see them, or how we're going to stick it to our family member at our next Thanksgiving, right? We think about that. Those are thoughts oftentimes we don't even realize we're doing it. There's a lot of noise in there. Now, we're in the noisiest world that anyone has ever lived in. Right now, there are all sorts of demands. You're expected to be more professional, more proactive, more efficient than ever before, right? There's this idea that, hey, like, if you can't do this fast, I can find somebody else who does. And we have a lot of stimuli happening all of the time. We're tied to TVs, we're tied to a lot of other things, and you may find yourself in a specific situation where you are responsible for miniature-sized human beings who give the appearance that if you don't pay attention to everything that they need, they might die. Maybe. They also think you're obscenely rich. And that upon requesting financial support or otherwise, if turned down, it's not a no. It's simply an invitation to step into persistence, knowing that upon the 29th time of making my request, all my dreams will come true and I'll get exactly what I want. And if you're a mom, you can meet those needs far more readily than dad can. So you work a full-time job, you come back, and you're just dealing with that. So I talk about silence, and instantly you're like sharpening that pitchfork, right? Give me silence, I can barely go to the bathroom in peace, right? On top of this external noise, we are tied to these little computers in our pockets that we have a symbiotic relationship with. They tell us who we are. They show us what we look like that day. They tell us where we're going. They tell us where we're supposed to be next. They're going to figure out how to biologically integrate it into us in the next 20 years. I kid you not. That sci-fi stuff is really cool to me. Also, terrifying, but it's going to happen. There's no stopping it. This is Skynet. Welcome to the Terminator. They also help us argue with people we barely know clear across the country. It's an amazing thing. Have you ever seen the comments on a Facebook post and say, there's no way you're that big of a jerk in real life? There's absolutely no way, right? And people are airing out issues with each other in a way that they would never do if they were face to face. You'd never do that. At least most people would never do that. So how do we make sense of all this noise and cut through it? How do we find a centeredness where we're not being pulled to and fro by every single thought, where we're not swiping up and hitting the Facebook icon or the Insta icon without even thinking about it? And I guess there's this thing called TikTok, right? I hang out with some teenagers on Wednesday nights from time to time, and I'm told like that there's this thing called TikTok. I don't know what it is, but that's the next wave of social media, TikTok, right? Guys, am I right? Yeah, I sound like I'm so old right now. So yes, you do. But I mean, we have all these things going on, and it's a lot to cut through. So what if we could just silence it all? What if we could find some relief? What if we could know the difference between our thoughts and what's really happening? What if we could stop worrying about stuff that just ain't happening? Because the majority of the torment that come from the thoughts that we have is us is thinking about things that are not currently happening or will not happen or might, at the very least, might not happen. Right? Have you ever found yourself in that place before? Being in the Midwest, we kind of have this like downturn, this slight pessimism in the way that we process information. Garrison Keillor from Prairie Home Companion has this thing that he always said of, we in the deep dark north know that if things aren't bad now, they very may well will be. I think if we could silence that, we'd be happier at the very least. Or at least find peace in the midst of it. So, how do I cultivate silence in my life? How do I do that? Because if I just sit down and I think, okay, I'm going to be quiet, 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 I'm going to be... Then there's this inner narrative going on, and that doesn't sound like peace to me. There is a method that's thousands upon thousands of years old that's actually rooted in ancient Christianity and Judaism, and that's just simply paying attention to your breath. Prepare the pitchforks. Because I went back, and a lot of people call this meditation. Okay? Whoa! I went back and I read some articles from 2004 and earlier from Christianity Today, Charisma Magazine, upon the dangers of focusing on the breath. And they made some interesting points, but I want to lay out for you how we could be missing some things and how there are a lot of things in ancient Christianity that we need to reclaim. I will start by saying this very spiritual fact, that being religiously averse to focusing on the breath is the same as being religiously averse to not aiming to the center of the toilet. Though, by evidence of many men's restrooms, many may have a religious aversion to aiming at the center. I don't know. Maybe that's a thing. We're going to take a poll later. Okay? Let's talk about the roots of Christianity real quick, too. I know that the portraits of Jesus make us think that he was George Washington's vegan son. However, he was a brown guy from the Middle East. Amen. And so if you find yourself ever in a Christian church, you're in a Christian church, welcome, great to have you. You find yourself in a religion that has Eastern roots. And there are a lot of things that have mystical components that in Westernism we've skimmed over or ignored or pushed that to the side. However, let me just review some basic beliefs about Jesus that we all generally affirm. The guy was born of a virgin. He turned water into wine. He was a great guy to have at parties. His go-to method for curing blindness was to spit in the blind guy's eyes. Sometimes there was dirt involved. And when he died, drum roll please, he rose from the dead. So, take conscious breathing, those other 4 things I just listed, shake them around in a bingo cup, throw them out on the table, and one of these things doesn't look as weird as the others I just mentioned. Let's go deeper, okay? You still with me? Let's go deeper. There's this idea from an early Christian theologian about 450 years after Jesus, this guy named Augustine was airing out these ideas about this thing called original sin, which the Catholic Church grabbed onto, which evangelicalism has grabbed onto as well. Augustine was talking about this idea that everybody has brokenness inside of them. His reflection was that this was more of a communal thing, this idea that we together are responsible for healing and repairing, and that there's this idea of collective sin as well. But we've grabbed onto it to a large degree, and every single person in the room has come in to this idea that the story starts in Genesis 3 because of original sin, where man is broken and depraved and in need of a healer and a savior. Now, some of that is true, but the problem is Genesis 3 is after Genesis 1, where God says, he looks at humanity and he says, you're good. You're good. But our story, many of us, starts at you're awful, you're evil, depraved, and you were born that way. And that's something that we hold on to deeply. Is it any wonder that we have the hardest time following just simple, basic parts of the Christian faith, like love your neighbor as yourself or love your enemy? We're still busy trying to figure out how to love ourselves because we're starting in Genesis 3. We don't start in Genesis 1. And so because we start in Genesis 3, there's a deep distrust in ourselves. There's this idea that if I do look inward, all I'm going to find is ugliness. All I'm going to find is pain. All I'm going to find is brokenness and grief and things that are going to get me into trouble. And I say that out loud, and we're all so quiet because we know that that is true. That is exactly where we came from. That was the beginning of the invitation that we all came into. But Genesis 1 says, you're good. We have all been affected by a sinful and broken world. We have done our fair share of contributing to it as well, haven't we? But that's not where the story starts. And if you start the story in the wrong place, chances are you're liable to end up in the wrong place. Speaking of Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God said, let there be light. Hold on, wait. God did what? He said, so when you say something, you speak, right? What do you need to do to be able to speak? You need to take a breath. It's as if the very beginning of this book that we base our entire faith upon says, hey, if you're going to do anything important, anything creative, anything restorative in the world, you got to take a breath. You with me? Yeah. So all this buildup for this ridiculously simple thing? Yeah. It's ridiculously simple and aggravatingly difficult to do. If I thought about all of us trying to do this together, but I don't want to force anything on you, and at the same time, I think you're going to get instantly frustrated that we realize that we can't just follow a breath from the very beginning to the very end of it, even 10 times. But this ancient way of silencing our thoughts, of realizing that the only person that we can control on our best day is ourselves. Realizing that all of the sound around us oftentimes are things that we have no control over either. That, for me, has been the single most amazing venue for God to come in and speak to me. And that's the only way, just by breathing and silencing my thoughts, has been it's difficult to exaggerate what it has done in my life. So a place to start is, everybody thinks they've got to do like 10 minutes of this stuff. And like most like the diehard Christian meditators are like, okay, if you can't do 15 minutes, then you're weak. Sorry, buddy. I grew up in this church, and I'd get hauled out crying sometimes, but there's this great story where I was acting up, and Dad told me, he's like, dude, I'm going to swat you if you don't stop it. And I didn't stop it like 5 times. And so Dad picks me up, takes me like as walking down this very aisle with me. And I, as the doors are closing, I say, pray for me. My first experience realizing that prayer doesn't always work. True story. I kid you not. It's a real thing. Where to start? Should have just taken a breath. Where to start? Okay. There are a lot of resources online. I'll mention those at the very end here, okay? But my encouragement to you, if the whole discipline is really to be able to help you recognize your thoughts, that you're actually thinking, that there's all this stuff going on here, rattling around all of the time. And it's brutal. And it affects everything. It affects our relationships and our emotions and where we're at. And so, number one, I would say just start with taking 10 minutes. Whoa, hold on, Joel. Taking 10 breaths. Like sit in your car before you go into work, wake up, make it the first thing that you do, grab your coffee, whatever, and just see if you can follow 10 simple breaths in and out. And just follow the sensation of breathing. This amazing thing happens where you start to recognize that you're thinking. Hold on, like I'm worrying about this next thing. Do I really need to worry about that? Hold on, I'm really upset at this person right now. Do I really need to be upset about that? There's this amazing thing in the Bible that we talk about, be restored by the renewing of your mind. Well, if your mind is always rattling around and if it's always doing marathons, then how in the world is it ever going to be renewed? It's not just with sleep. It's consciously what we're doing throughout the day. And if you find yourself throughout the day having these thoughts where you're worrying about crap that just ain't happening, or you're upset at somebody that maybe it's affecting you adversely, or you don't need to be thinking about that right now, or that happened years and years ago and we got to figure out a way to forgive. Number one, don't judge yourself about it. Because just like temptation, it's not legitimately harmful to you until you start to partner with it. Right? All these things about temptation being the same as sin, it's not the same. It becomes sin when you start to partner with that thought. Okay? But thinking a thought isn't necessarily an out. Like, I want to punch my boss in the face. We can all recognize that as having some adverse effects on your life, right? But instead, recognize that you're having that. Say, hey, where are these emotions coming from? Where are these feelings coming from? If you're a person who doesn't consider yourself emotional, that's fine. I'm not trying to play into that. Everybody has anger in some way. Everybody has frustration or sadness in some way. And doing this can help. If you find yourself before something that you're really, really nervous about or feel uneasy about, try to just take one breath. I've started doing that lately, and it's amazing. I do 5 to 10 minutes every morning of just consciously focusing on breathing. And here's what's happened in the midst of that for me. I get really angry. I'm going to blame God for all the good things that have occurred from this discipline, okay? I get really angry, like redhead angry. And because I've started doing this on a regular basis, trying to silence all these thoughts and all this inner dialogue, I can go from an 8 out of 10 ticked off to my wife puts her hand on my shoulder and says, Joel, just take a breath. And I instantly go to a 2 out of 10. Instantly. Never would have happened to me before. I would have stewed all day long. My worry and anxiety have lessened dramatically. I've been able to be more present with my wife and my kids and with any person that I talk to. There's this wonderful thing that happens when we're talking to a person for a long time is we stop and we go, hold on, did I miss something? Because I was thinking about something else and I might have missed something in this conversation. And just being aware that our mind is wandering is amazing for relationships. Because then instead of feeling guilty about it, instead of feeling like we completely blew what could have been a meaningful conversation, we don't judge ourselves and we say, hey, I'm going to start again right now. And there's no reason that I can't contribute in a meaningful way to this interaction with this person that I care about. Does that make sense? I've been able to enjoy more moments. Not try to speed up time, realize that social media is a complete joke. If you rely on it for your business, I mean no offense, but it really is. Like, again, there's no way that any of us would talk to each other like we talk on social media. There's no way. And I don't want to make you feel shame about that, but face to face, we would interact differently. We'd make our thoughts known in a different way. Okay, letting go of my ego. And the biggest thing just since last June is I realized how alcohol wasn't working for me anymore. Living in Minneapolis, being a freelance musician, alcohol is just a part of your life. And I realized it had been getting pretty destructive for me. And so since last June, I've been cutting way back. And for me, that's amazing. That's not a broad, sweeping statement. It's not the substance, it's what we do with it. But for me, it wasn't working, and I would have never realized that. I would have never realized that hadn't I started keeping a daily practice of silence and quiet. So it sounds pretty potent, right? Just based on my experience. And I don't know what will happen with you. I do know that to me, up until about a year ago, this was a completely foreign concept to me. And to experience the outcomes and God coming in and speaking into my life and changing these things has been astoundingly powerful. And my wife could tell you, like, she's noticed a huge difference. The world needs more restorative people who say that they're Christians. The world needs more Christians who have figured out how to start Genesis 1 so that we can love our neighbor as ourselves. So maybe even love our enemies too. There's a lot of critique of the religion, this faith that we follow right now in the media, and rightfully so. But we have the unique privilege of being able to change that narrative. But it's not going to happen until we can be more mindful, until we can silence the noise, until we can be restored from the inside out. There's a beautiful quote from a Franciscan priest that I love, and it's, we don't think our way into new ways of living. We live our way into new ways of thinking. We don't think our way into new ways of living. We live our way into new ways of thinking. And so, yeah, many of us, myself included, have a lot of knowledge up here, a lot of ways that make sense to carry out my faith, but it gets really powerful when we live it out. So, yeah, I think that's it. Again, no judgment. If you find yourself being completely bleeping bored trying to do this practice, that's okay. That's everyone's experience. It's like when you set out to go running for the first time, that you're like, I'm not going to ever do that again unless there's a T-Rex chasing me. Never again. But if you keep up with it, if you do it, you might not be Cameron Hanes, but you'll be able to run for longer. You'll be healthier. You'll be more fit. And the same is true of this discipline. There's a great resource online that is a non-religious app that doesn't push any Buddhist ideas, which I think is the main Christian aversion to any idea of meditation and silence. It's called Headspace. I can't recommend it enough. It just walks you through being quiet. You can choose a 3, a 5, and a 10-minute deal. I don't get any money from them at all. I'm not part of that venture capital endeavor at all. But it's amazingly potent and really helpful. And it's free, okay? If after this you want to talk about anything about silence, about starting in Genesis 3 instead of Genesis 1, that's like a whole series, okay? And I know that that's an idea that, again, is why I gave a preface at the very beginning. I'm happy to talk about that. I'm here. You can find my number somewhere or email me. Or if you want to talk about any of these benefits that I've found, even deciding to give up alcohol, I'm happy to talk about that, okay? I'm going to pray real quick. And then let's just take a breath. Is that okay? God, I've said my entire life on this Christian journey that I want to hear your voice, that I want to know your heart, that I want to be in the center of your will. And for decades I prayed, and for decades I read the Bible. And I love those things and those practices and those disciplines. I think they're so important. But I was plagued by my thoughts. And I think the whole purpose of any spiritual practice is to knock on reality, is to get past our delusions about ourselves, the ways that we think about other people, and to bring us to this place where we can hear from you, where you can tell us who we are, and we can live fuller lives that are restorative and healing, just as you lay out in this beautiful book. So help us to do that. Help us to start in Genesis 1, realizing we've been affected by Genesis 3. There's too much brokenness in this world. There's too much. But it didn't start that way. So help us to explore that, find peace in that. We love you. I thank you for this church. I thank you for how my entire life it's been this safe place to be able to explore faith. And I pray it's the same for every single person sitting in these seats. In your precious name, amen.
Thank you, Pastor Joel. Can we just give him a quick hand? This practice of silence is something that's so countercultural for us, but here's what I want you to catch. It's something that's very biblical. Because you go through Scripture and you see that Jesus regularly stepped away and found a lonely place to get by himself and to quiet the noise around him. You see in the Old Testament with Moses, as he led the people of God from slavery to the promised land, Moses spent years and years and decades in the wilderness by himself, learning how to hear the voice of God. David, the great king of Israel, was a shepherd first who learned when he was out in the backside of the wilderness by himself to train his mind to focus on God and not the noise around him. The key of this spiritual discipline of silence is recognizing that we're not just emptying our minds, but it's that we're quieting the noise that crowds out the voice of God in our lives. So this week, I want to encourage you, as Joel has, to just try to find some time to take 10 breaths to say, God, quiet the noise. Help me to fix my thoughts on you. If you want to speak to me, whatever you want to do in this time, do it. But to just take some time to make this a regular practice. As he said, when you get started, it's probably going to feel a little bit awkward. But the more we learn to stop talking and to quiet the noise, the more likely we are to start to listen to the voice of God in our lives. This is why this is a spiritual discipline that's not about trying harder, but it's about training wisely. It's about allowing God to speak into our hearts and into our lives in a way that we would miss if we crowded it out with all the other noise. So I want to encourage you to do that this week, and I trust that as you do, you're going to experience God speaking to you and challenging you and working in your life in ways that maybe he's been trying to over the past several days or weeks or months, but you've been too busy and it's been too loud for you to stop and pay attention. So I want to just encourage you with that. So with that, I want to just pray with you guys as you go and pray this blessing over you as we do every single week. Lord, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he smile on you and be gracious to you. May he show you his favor and give you his peace. Go in the grace of God. We'll see you back next week.